everyone, it's Sevi. Zubair Theater's star dancer Nilou is getting her rerun banner in version 3.6. There was a lot of discussion surrounding Nilou's interesting but very niche kit when she was released. I've got my full guide on her linked down in the description, which you can check out to prepare for her arrival. But now that some time has passed, we've gotten new units, previews of the future, and a chance to more closely evaluate Nilou and her team's potential. So it's a good time to review what concerns about Nilou have been addressed or remain, how she's gotten better over time, and her overall pull value. Has this late bloomer finally bloomed? Let's talk about Nilou and why it's worth pulling for her or not. For a quick summary on what makes Nilou's kit and teams very unique, it mostly has to do with her passive's bloom buffing capabilities. By limiting your team to only Hydro and Dendro characters, Nilou can activate her Golden Chalice bounty effect for the entire party, which replaces regular Dendro cores generated with Bountiful cores instead. Bountiful cores explode much faster, have larger AoE, and get a further damage boost based on how much HP Nilou has. The effect also gives a team-wide EM buff if you get hit by Dendro, counting the self-damage of Bloom. All this means that Nilou raises the floor of Bloom reaction damage for all your party members. Bloom teams without Nilou can still be good and have more elemental flexibility, but she's a quintessential unit for making the strongest pure Bloom teams possible. It's very likely that this will be an exclusive ability to her, making her a special niche unit to have. While she also has playstyles that aren't Bloom focused, it's no question that a pure Bloom team is really her thing. But is it really that strong? Because of her restrictive passive, the payoff in terms of such teams' power levels should be fitting. Thankfully, in the right scenarios, Nilou's Bloom teams are very strong. They're most effective against enemy mobs, since that means faster Bloom generations and maximizing the Bountiful core's AoE damage. Against single target scenarios, your core generation is significantly slowed down, but Nilou can still be pretty serviceable, especially if you have party members with great Hydro and Dendro application. With characters triggering blooms left and right, this can make for some insanely fast and big bursts of bloom damage. Really, it's a sight to behold when it fills your screen with green numbers and explosions. And in many Nilou teams, unless you really deliberately isolate which unit is triggering the blooms, it eventually becomes difficult to keep track of bloom ownership. But since Nilou's HP boosts everyone's Bountiful core damage anyway, this makes it so that regardless if your party members have high EM builds or not, everyone can still contribute a lot of bloom damage as long as you keep generating and popping cores. In fact, Nilou teams can be incredibly easy to play due to their low skill entry level. There's very little need for complicated rotation orders or timings. That's not to say that you can't optimize damage and rotations in Nilou teams. Like, if you have strong Dendro applicators, it's possible to make Hydro the more frequent trigger. It's also possible to not use Nilou's Hydro application to isolate the bloom ownership on another Hydro unit instead. You could even be conscious of stats and build more EM on her teammates so that their bloom damage goes even higher. But by default, Nilou teams are so unga bunga to play and build that they're one of the very friendly team types for casual players. However, core explosions also deal damage to the active character, which necessitates having a healer if you want to keep your team alive.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Your rate of elemental application also determines how fast you can generate cores, which affects your DPS. This brings us to an important topic about using Nilou, which is her team comps. Since Nilou's Bountiful core effect has a specific team restriction, it's really important to have the teammates to pull it off. Only a team of purely Hydro plus Dendro is allowed to unlock the passive, so no Cryo unit for a Freeze Bloom or Fridge team, no Anemo to group the enemies, and no Electros or Pyros for Hyper Blooms or Burgeons. I also want to make it clear that she does have teams outside her pure Bloom ones, like Vaporize, or being a general Hydro applicator for teams that don't activate her passive. But of course, her true purpose is in her pure Bloom teams. For that, our options were limited back then on account of Sumeru being newly released and having limited Dendro options. However, it could only be uphill from there, and fortunately, Nilou's roster of teammates has been growing ever since. Before, we only had two options for dedicated healers in Nilou Bloom teams, Barbara and Kokomi. The lack of a dedicated Dendro healer was made even more apparent. At least Barbara was an accessible and serviceable option, but there was still a gap in possible alternatives. alternatives. Her viable Denjo teammates were also limited to Cole and Denjo Traveler, as Tignari's playstyle isn't as compatible in Nilou teams. So she technically has a default functional free-to-play team available: Denjo Traveler, Cole, and Barbara. This is already a starting point to taste the power that Nilou teams can bring. However, there are still apparent limitations. Most notably, Traveler and Cole's Denjo application fall under Circle Impact, and that these are characters many players probably won't prioritize getting to max level. Clearly, there's much room for improvement. With the arrival of Nahida and Alhaitham, we've gotten two very impressive Denjo applicators and on-field drivers. Of course, these are both 5 stars, but since they both have more general application, especially Nahida, they individually had good pull value anyway. More importantly, Yao Yao is an amazing unit who fills in both roles of dedicated healer and Denjo applicator, making her a welcome addition for Nilou teams. She also has a built-in Denjo resistance bonus buff during her burst, letting her tank the self-damage of course really well. If you got a free Yao Yao during the Lantern Rite, then technically she's also a strong free-to-play option, and you won't be confined to Barbara as your free healer. But there's more to look forward to, since we're soon getting 2 brand new Denjo units, Kave and Baiju. I'll reserve my final judgment on how they perform with Nilou when I can finally try them out myself, but there are a couple of things we can already surmise based on the current info we have. Kave's looking to be another Denjo driver with his Denjo-infused autos, and interestingly, he'll actually heal from taking Denjo core damage, which helps the survivability issue of Nilou teams if he primarily takes the on-field role. Baiju is a long-awaited healer who generates shields, though those are supposed to break or refresh periodically to apply and deal Denjo damage and provide constant resistance to interruption. We'll have to revisit just how good they will be with Nilou when they finally come out, but for now, I'm quite optimistic. I discussed in my Nilou pre-release video that she felt like she's releasing a bit too early since we don't have an actual wide roster of Denjo characters yet. Well, the wait has been paying off, and now that Hoyo is giving us more and more Denjo characters, Nilou's potential is coming to fruition. At the moment though, I still find our 4-star Hydro roster in particular to be lacking. We currently only have Xingqiu, Barbara, and Candice. Though all of them have their own means of applying Hydro, Xingqiu's Hydro application and personal damage are certainly ahead of his peers, making him an in-demand unit for other team archetypes as well. Candice certainly has good potential for Nilou teams. Her base kit turns her melee teammates into Hydro applicators, which helps with continuous core generation, and her switching mechanics give AoE Hydro application. However, much more of that potential is locked behind her C6, which many players likely don't have, given that she has only been rated up on a banner once. Considering this, I personally think our Hydro 4-stars need a few solid additions to improve Nilou team's accessibility. Hopefully, transitioning to Fontaine will bring us those units as well. Of course, if you have the funds or luck to get compatible 5-stars, then that's going to further boost her team's power, and you will feel a significant improvement from her base free-to-play team. So building your Denjo and Hydro roster for vertically improving Nilou's team is always an option if you're really into the blooming life. I suppose there's some options that would be nice to have for Nilou teams, most notably a Denjo or Hydro character with consistent crowd-controlling mechanics. Still, her already evolved roster has been quite an improvement, and it should get better as time goes by. Moving on, what about building Nilou? Is it easy? A free-to-play experience? Let's start with her weapons. Nilou does have viable free-to-play options, however they aren't exactly well optimized for her bloom builds. Nilou really wants to build HP since that benefits her entire team's bountiful core damage, but as of now, the only weapon that has HP as its substat is the Key of Kajni Suit, her signature weapon. It gives a lot of HP and buffs your team's EM, which allows you to more easily increase her bountiful core's damage. So for her teams, it's quite a boost in damage and obviously her overall best in slot. However, it's also a very niche weapon with very specific ideal character uses outside of Nilou. As of now, pulling for it is mostly a vertical investment for her, unless more units come out that can take good advantage of it. Consider as well that in this upcoming rerun, the key will be with Nahida's signature weapon. So if you try pulling for the key, will your account find a really good use if you lose to the catalyst? Don't worry though, because Nilou is perfectly fine without the key. You could just settle for other weapons like the craftable Iron Sting or EM and ER weapons in general. Who knows, maybe with Fontaine we'll get more HP weapons and perhaps even a craftable HP sword. As for her artifacts, she primarily wants to stack HP from set bonuses, main stats, and substats. ER and EM are also welcome, but are lower priority. Thankfully, HP pieces and rolls are very easy to come by, so farming for her should be relatively easy. And for her sets, a 2-piece Tenacity is the go-to set, plus whichever of these 2-piece sets. But one of the new artifact sets of version 3.6, Vorukasha's Glow, gives HP as its 2-piece set effect, which is the second 5-star artifact set to do so. With this, it's finally possible to build Nilou on a double HP set combo, which should be the most efficient and effective artifact combo to target. There's more opportunity to save resources since her talent levels aren't really all that important for her bloom teams, since it's her passives that are more relevant. So if you want, you can just not prioritize leveling them up and spend your resources on more important things. What you'll want to prioritize more is increasing her character level though, to maximize her base HP and bloom damage. You can also increase the EM stats of her teammates to generally boost the base reaction damage of the cores. For instance, the instructor set's team EM buff will be very strong. If you identify your team's main trigger, you can switch their build to an EM heavy one, or if everyone seems to be triggering cores, you can give more EM substats or main stats all around. This is highly optional though, as Nilou largely relies on her own HP for adding the damage. The point is that there's definitely room to really optimize the build of Nilou's teammates as well, so if you want to put in the work, then that will take more effort. But again, even without such considerations, Nilou's bloom teams already have a high damage floor with even just low to mid investment levels. If you're also wondering about her early constellations value, she follows the common trend of C2 being a significant bump to her character's power level. On top of C1's effect, C2 lets you reduce her enemy's Hydro and Dendro resistance. That's a significant increase not just for Nilou's personal damage, but for your entire team's damage. Not only are you boosting your Bountiful Core's reaction damage, you're also boosting raw Hydro and Dendro damage. But like many other 5 stars, her C2 is really unnecessary, and there could be other more valuable things to spend your primos on, especially since Nilou is already a very niche unit to begin with. If you want to vertically strengthen her bloom team, it may be more practical to invest in getting better teammates instead, like Nahida, who individually is a strong pull regardless of Nilou's presence. This brings me to my last point, her pull value. Nilou and her teams can indeed have high power levels, but her pull value for many players can arguably be low since she's a niche unit that requires a very specific bloom comp to unlock her power. More importantly, if you're a new player that's currently building your roster of 5-star characters and who isn't really a big spender, it might be a better idea to prioritize pulling other characters who are more versatile for different team comps. For example, she's running alongside Nahida's banner, and assuming you don't have either of them yet, I would generally recommend Nahida sooner just because of her high horizontal value for various Dendro-based comps, including Nilou teams. To reiterate, Nilou teams are very strong, but she carves out her own niche instead of slotting into your already existing teams. She becomes a great pull if you feel comfortable enough with your current Hydro and Dendro roster and are ready to go down this niche yet interesting rabbit hole of pure bloom teams. Otherwise, she isn't a high priority, but can, at the very least, work with a baseline free-to-play friendly team. Overall, Nilou has fortunately been blooming quite well thanks to the growing Dendro cast, and with more Dendro units on the way, plus Fontaine's impending Hydro units, there's still more room for growth and variation with future Nilou teams. Anyway, that's going to be all for this video, and I would love to hear in the comments what you think about Nilou, whether you are trying to decide to pull her or if you already got her on her first release. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!